Hi my friend, in this video we're going to be making a throwback tech house song like CASSIMM song Valerie. And we're going to find out if we can do this in under 6 hours by using the 80-20 rule of music production. What you're listening to is the finished song we'll be breaking down today. And I'm going to show you how this Ableton project file was made, layer by layer, in the original order I followed, so you can easily follow along yourself. This tune only took me about 6 hours to finish, completely arranged, mixed, mastered, and ready to be used in DJ sets and sent out to record labels. Stick around to the end for a full recap of the 80-20 rule, because after having produced music for over 15 years, this is easily the fastest and best way I've come across. You can download this video's project files, as well as over 30 full project files inspired by Beatport Top 100 songs, with new files being added weekly. Just visit the link on screen or in the description. And if finishing songs super fast like this is something you'd like help with, you can also download a free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that I use to completely finish one song per week. That said, let's jump into this. Alright, so this is a look at the project file for this one. So the first thing I want to show you is how I always start these with some confidence, knowing that it's going to sound good. That way you're kind of wasting less time as you're doing it. And the trick is to combine two common ideas into one newer idea, and that's combining like a remix with a reference track. So in this instance, the reference track is CASSIMM's tune Valerie. And what I'll do is I'll take note of the key and BPM. So the key is G flat minor, and then the BPM is 127 BPM. Then what I like to do is, while I'm building out like the layers of this reference track, which I'm going to show you in a moment when we jump into Ableton, I like to have a different hook in there so that I'm both building out the track to the reference and then also being influenced by the new hook. And what I'm finding is a really awesome thing to do is do remixes. This way it's something that people are actually going to listen to, and it's really useful in DJ sets. There's a whole bunch of reasons, but what I'll do is I'll find the reference track. In this instance, it was a tune that was in the Beatport Top 10. And then I'll kind of just go through some popular songs or older throwback songs and try to listen, like play them over top of each other to find something that kind of sparks that fire for the combination. And when I feel like I'm kind of onto something, what I'll do is I'll also take note of the key and the BPM of the remix track. So in this instance, it's A flat major, and it's 138 BPM. So when it comes to the BPM first, it's a little bit easier to kind of notice the relationship there. They're off by about 10 BPM, which can be potentially an issue. But you want to, if they're too like far apart, you can get kind of, you're speeding up the vocal and it'll sound like a chipmunk, or you're slowing it down too much and it sounds weird. The closer, the better. In this instance, it didn't end up being that bad because the final track I was able to boost it up to 130 and then bring this down to 130, so it kind of works pretty well. It's not too far off. What might look at first like a big issue is, you can see here, this one's in G flat minor and this one's in A flat major, so minor and major keys don't usually mix and there could be an issue. And that's why I have this little handy music theory cheat sheet that I built. And basically it's just a piano roll to help me keep an eye on the notes, and then using something called the circle of fifths, where what we can do here is something kind of interesting. So that one, the remix is an A flat major, which is right here. And every major key has a relative minor, and it's basically a minor key that shares the same notes. So when we look at this chart here, you can see the A flat major is an F minor. And then if we remember that the reference track is an F sharp minor, you can see now that just by flipping the A flat major to its relative minor, we're just a semitone away. So then doing the relative minor of A flat major means that we're only a semitone away. So that's something pretty useful to use. It's really useful for DJs to know the circle of fifths, and in particular when you're combining different samples, whether it's remix or something you found on Splice. It really opens up the possibilities of what you can work with in terms of producing a track, as well as when you're DJing. It opens up the mixing and key options, right? So it's super useful to use, and that's how I used it in this instance. With that said, let's jump into Ableton and kind of do a layer by layer breakdown of what we got going on here. All right, so this is a look at the Ableton project file for this one. And one of the first things I'll do when I'm working on like a remix kind of track like this is I'll drop the reference track in here. So what I've done is I've dropped the reference track in here. It's a little cut up and messed up around now, but I'll throw this in here and then I'll adjust the track so that it's turned off and I can flick back and forth between this and what I'm building so that I can set everything correctly and build against the reference track. The main three things that I want you to focus on is when doing something like this, as you're flicking back and forth, is first setting the right pattern, so getting the right notes and the rhythm of it. And then the next thing is to select the right sounds. And then the third thing is to set the volume relative to that reference track. Those three things, flicking back and forth to the reference track and then making those changes, is going to really get you that 80-20, that 80% result for only 20% of the effort. So once that's in here, the next thing I'll also do is set up one of these structure or arrangement tracks. And what this essentially is just using empty MIDI clips with the larger sections of the song and listening to the reference track to figure out what those are. So in this instance, I actually started that over here, and this is a better look at what this song's structure is. Eventually, like, I did it and made it my own, right? But the idea here is it makes it super useful for two reasons. One is as we're building up the song vertically, we might want to move over to the intro if we're focusing on the drums or where the subs is, if we're working on the bass or where the vocal comes in. It helps us move around the reference track to help isolate the parts a little bit better. And then the biggest thing is that then when we're moving from vertical arrangement to horizontal arrangement, we can use this structure track to help flesh out the full song and arrange it to a professional arrangement. If you want to learn a little bit more about that on this project file page here, which, by the way, if you get that free toolkit, you'll also get access to all these project file pages. You just won't be able to download the actual project files, but the pages I give away to everybody who's subscribed. Down here, it's this video here, Pro Ableton 12, this one here, how to use reference tracks correctly. This will show you how I usually go about this. So doing the arrangement track, adding in the reference, making it so you can flick between the two. That's all right here. So once that is in there, something that I've been doing a little bit differently lately is what I'm also doing is throwing in the track here, like the remix track as well, and then playing them together, like changing this, like you could see I changed the semitones and played around with that a little bit, the pitch of the tune, and then I'll play it against the reference track at certain points of it to further check that it sounds good. In a somewhat similar key and everything sounding nicely. This way I know when I start breaking down each individual element, it's going to be actually worth my time and the result's going to be sick. Then the next thing that I've been doing that's also a little bit different is I've then been breaking out the stems. And so what I've been doing is using a stem separator. In this instance, I was using something called Nuo stems, and I'll isolate out the drums just like this. So if we have a listen to it, there we go. There we go. So this is the drums from the CASSIMM tune, and why I find this useful is two things. One is it's easier to like slice out little pieces. So you can see here I extracted the kick drum, over here the hi-hat, or the snare rather, I think, and then over here is the open hi-hat. So this, by like separating it out like this, it's a nice way for you to snatch those little pieces. And also once you grab them, then you can right click and do show similar files, and then find something similar in your library to what you just grabbed from the reference track, which is super useful. And then also something I've been doing is, well, I guess I'll show you in a second, but the idea is to then you do the kick first. And what I've been doing actually is, maybe I should just do it in actual order. So let me show you what I do. So first I'll get those drums separated, and then I'll slice out one of the kicks and then do the kick drum first. So let me just kind of set up the project here so that we're just listening to everything in the order that I built it out. So I'll start with the kick. And so the kick looks and sounds like this. So it's just a classic 4 on the 4 pattern. Just going 1, 2, 3, 4 in terms of the pattern. One thing that I do too is the template that I have. If you go back here and go to this Pro Ableton 12 template, this video here, and then also all these videos are in a playlist in the YouTube description as well if you wanted to check that out. I have my template set up so these notes and like the notes for, let's say, the claps and the snares and the open hi-hats and all that, they're already set in here with a MIDI clip because it's almost always going to be this anyway. So it's just kind of a time saver thing, something I recommend you do as well. And then also there's this little like trick that I added here. Just like a little da-da-da-da at the end of every couple bars there. And then in terms of the sound, something that I've been doing that I really love is this. So I found this thing, I think somewhere on Reddit, someone was posting about this. It's called Drum Clone. And basically once you like snatch that little piece of kick from the reference track, you drag it into here. This is what it sounded like first. You can hear there's like hi-hats and all sorts of like gunk on there. And then this is what this little plugin is doing. So it does a really nice job of taking the kick out of the reference and removes like any hi-hats or claps or snares or percussion or anything like that to get you a really nice kick. So then you're in a nice position where you can do one of two things. You can do like the show similar sound and with a really nicely isolated kick to find similar stuff in your library, or you can just use this. In this instance, I just use this. And then a little bit of processing. What I'm doing here is a little bit of drum bus. Main thing is using this boom feature here, which can be useful for kind of adding a little bit more low end, a little bit of subbiness to the bottom of the kick. But I've also just only brought it in by about 18%, so nothing too crazy. I've been playing with this little snapback device that's really cool. It can add transients. In this instance, I was trying to add like this club kick transient, so it adds again a little bit more like body to the bottom. The saturator's doing nothing. This EQ is doing nothing, but I have it, I think they're here. Sometimes what I might do is have this set up to just turn it off and on. It's more of like an arrangement trick to remove the low end out of the kick, kind of like how DJs do it. And then a little Spectrum, not really using this, and then K-Clip just as a mixing thing that we can get to at the end. But really, the main thing here is like, you can see here, this was only subtly added in. Everything else is very subtle. It's really just finding the right pattern, finding a similar sound, in this case actually extracting the sound, and then just flicking back and forth to get the volume correct. Then the thing that I've been doing a little bit differently is what I actually did when building this tune out is instead of like doing all the drums right away, I find that could be a really awesome like way to build it out, but sometimes you might build out all the drums, spend like half an hour or an hour, whatever, building out the drums, and then you build out everything else and you find it doesn't work. So what I've been doing is extracting the kick, and then I'll see if I can show you what this kind of sounded like. Basically, I extracted the kick, and then on that track where I isolated out all the drums, add an EQ to like remove everything under 200, so basically removing the kick from that. And then what I had was this. So if you here listen to that, essentially the idea is I have my own kick because I feel like that's important to have, and then to start off I was just using the drums like extracted from the CASSIMM tune, so that I had a basic drum track to work with, so that I can move on to the more melodic parts where I find sometimes that's where the tune can really get messed up, and end up being like, okay, this isn't working, I'm going to ditch this tune. So this way I'm able to very quickly move on to the melodic stuff. So after that, what I did was worked on the vocals. So in the CASSIMM tune, it does this cool like stuttery vocal kind of bit, and so that's what I wanted to get correct first. So let me show you how that turned out. I'm just going to turn off everything else so we can focus on this. And then let's maybe go from here. And then it has like this little turnaround bit. So this is just trying to get that similar kind of stuttery little vocal bit that they had going on in their track. Basically what I did is just like, as you can see here, just kind of cut it up as I wanted to. And then in terms of any processing, add a little bit of distortion from like a raw distortion preset, but barely adding any of it, just a little bit of kind of vibiness to it. Getting rid of a bunch of the lows, and then using this auto pan here to kind of just move it around like the left and right a little bit as like a little kind of cool production trick. And then one thing that I did do is I use the full vocal at certain points, and this is still in the background because it's not very, I don't know, it's kind of cool and works against it. And what I did is when the main vocal is playing, this you can see this little automation here. The amount opens up, so it's pushing further left and right so that the main vocal could go down the middle. And then we're just running into this little. This is all kind of like basically a little channel strip that I built. So if you want to see more about the channel strip, all of these would be in this VST guide here. We'll show you how I go about that. But basically, so everything's all in one thing, and there's all these like one knobs to do all the main moves. So usually it's playing with the transients, a little bit of sidechain, one knob sidechain here. Instead, we're just using a shaper from like the Ableton shaper device, the Max for Live device, to get that like pumping sound and make room for the kick. And this way you don't have to do any like routing with compressors and all that stuff. It's all, everything I like to do is all about kind of working quickly and fast. Yeah, that's a look at the vocal there. What I wanted was the vocal also in there before I started to work on the bass, because I wanted to make sure that the hook was in place as I'm building everything else around it. Like I mentioned before we jumped into Ableton here, the idea is having that hook there really helps you build out everything against it and make sure that you're making decisions in service of the hook. And definitely want that to happen with the bass. So let's have a look at the bass line next, because that's what I did, right? Let's have a look and listen to this. Sick. So let's have a look at it here. So that was like a listen to the sound. In terms of the pattern, okay, it looks a little weirder than maybe it should, but the idea is it's playing note and then do 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 do, and then I think in the actual CASSIMM tune it's just pedaling on like one note, so it's playing less of a chord progression. In this instance, I was listening to the remix track, and I wanted to adjust the notes that it pedals on a bit so that it follows the chord progression of the vocal a bit more. Other than that, like the actual CASSIMM one, I would say is mostly just this. Just that. Do, 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 do. And then from there, I wanted it to sound a bit more original than compared to the like a straight rip of the CASSIMM one. So then I just kind of changed like some of the notes that are playing. So like that E is playing the whole time. Sometimes it's going E and then up a note. And then sometimes it's going down or doing the same note. Just something to keep it a little bit more different, and adding in these like slightly small little ghost note kind of things in between, just to keep it a little bit more different. And you can see here throughout the track, there's slightly different colors. And then what that is just each one is playing slightly different chord progression. So this one is a bit more like stable, just a few notes changing. And then this one is like bouncing around the chord progression a little bit more, as the vocal comes in. So just like small ideas to slowly evolve the tune and then have it play with the vocal more or less depending on if the vocal's actually even there or not. In terms of the sound design, what we'll do is kind of have a listen to what it sounds like by itself. So the first thing. So what I usually do is I'll start off with the sub. Main reason for that is it's like a pure bass tone, so it's similar to when you're writing the notes as if you're writing the notes on like a guitar or like a basic piano. You can really focus on making sure that the notes are correct and that it's actually playing against the harmony of the vocal correctly, before you get too bogged down in sound design. And then the next thing is I also like to separate out the sub. So like this sub is just taking care of the low end, and then I have a separate mid bass layer which allows me to focus on the sound design a lot more without it interrupting or messing with the low end. The idea is to get the sub low end sounding really full and then bring in character with the mid bass layer. So in terms of the sound, or the sound design, I guess, just using something I've made called the V sub. It's just an operator playing just a sine wave, and then the idea is that I'm bringing in a couple of different types of saturation, to kind of fill out the sound between the sub and the mid bass layer. So they're not as separated. It kind of fills out the sound a little bit more and adds a little bit of like grit and character to it as well. Within it is also one of those one knob sidechains just built into this, so that's just right there. So it is doing some pumping to quarter notes. And then the next thing is this synth bass mid bass layer. How I do this is you'll notice there's no MIDI here, And how I've set it up is that instead of having to copy and paste the MIDI over, because as you can see here, this is actually a really good example. I started, I think, with this really red looking MIDI clip. And then as I was building out the tune, I wanted the notes to slightly change. So that's why all these are slightly different colors, showing like slight variations. That means if I was doing this normally, I'd have to like paste this over, all over like this, as to make any change. And instead, what you can do is instead of having the MIDI track saying all ins, you can have it come in from another MIDI track. So in this instance, it's coming from the sub. So this means that this track here, the MIDI notes here, are being routed into this automatically. So that way you don't have to copy and paste the MIDI clips over. Big thing to do here though is on this mid bass layer, when you set it up like this, is to have this pitch device. So you can see here, I pitched it up 2 octaves from what the notes of the sub were playing. What you might find is that the sub sounds good at a certain octave, but the mid bass sounds better at a different octave. And this allows you to control it without having to copy the MIDI clips over and make any changes or anything like that. Let's have a listen to that. I think it's a pretty subtle mid bass layer, but solo it. So I think it turned out slightly different from the CASSIMM tune. The CASSIMM tune I think has more of like an analog kind of sounding bass, and this one is a little bit more of like a kind of tom sounding to me at least, which I kind of liked a little bit more. And the way I got the sound was interesting. I used something called Synplant 2, and what I did was with the AI isolated bass of the CASSIMM tune, I grabbed one note of it and dropped it into here. And what this basically does is uses some kind of machine learning AI something to find a bunch of different variations and try to copy that sample into like a synthesizer. So then you can like play the notes and adjust the synth as you want to. So I used that, picked one that worked. I don't think it shows you. Unfortunately, yeah, maybe this update would help. But basically it just does this cool little tree thing and you get to pick the grapes and decide which one sounds the best and leave it at that. And so that's how I found that mid bass sound. And then whenever setting up this mid bass layer, the idea is to cut out everything under like maybe 150, 200 hertz or so. So that way the sub is coming through nice and clean and the mid bass layer is just taking care of the mid bass layer. So this way you can see we can do all sorts of weird stuff with the mid bass layer without having to worry about the sub because the sub is preserved and that low end is nice and tight. Cool. So that is a good look at that. I actually have a separate video on this, but I felt like going all in on there, so that's fine. Then the next thing after that I worked on was, so I guess at this point it sounded like this. So at this point I was like, all right, this sounds pretty sick. I feel pretty comfortable that like it's worth the investment of time to keep going. I think actually that was what I did in like one session. So that was about an hour on last Friday that I spent kind of getting to this point. And then the next thing I did was I actually built out the rest of the drums. So let's have a look at that. So what we'll do is we'll just have it so it's just the drums for now. And I'll show you layer by layer how I built this out. So the way that I usually like to go about doing the drums is kind of the same for, I suppose, when doing a remake of anything. But the idea I find is to focus first on like whatever sound is coming through the most to you. Because that's probably the sound that's the most important to the like that's the sample or the sound or the instrument that's most important to the overall sound of that of the drums or whatever it is. So hope that ramble made sense, because what I'm trying to say is I started with the open hi-hat because when I was listening to this, the open hi-hat sounded like the most important thing. So let me turn off like the AI one. And then this is what we have. So let's take a look and listen to this open hi-hat. Okay, so in terms of first the pattern is like this offbeat thing. That's like, you can see here, it's like on the offbeat. Do. Very, very common with hats and open hi-hats. Again, that's why I have it so the template just kind of starts off like this. And then what I did was I actually took this sample here, which is from the I actually extracted that out from the reference track, and then I layered it in with a couple of different hits. So 5 and 17, this one, which is a little bit more on the left, and then 17, and this one, which is just kind of sounds similar. Well, not really. It just sounds more like loose and open, like how I feel like it sounds on the original. So what I did in this instance is I have this like open hat track here, and it's set up like this. And I already have some open hat sounds that I like quite a bit, whatever this is, 4, 5, or 6 or something like that. And the idea is I've already reduced the amount of hat sounds in this instance to what I really like and I find works really well. So that way I'm not digging through 100 samples every single time. This way I can just start with this. I can layer in one of the reference tracks. I can do the similar sound thing if I want to also. And it just speeds things up. So what I did is just layered up a bunch of different sounds like that. And also in terms of the pattern, there's this one little extra note that happens at the end of the second bar here. And then in terms, other than that, the main thing was just setting up the volume. So just flicking back and forth and setting the volume. So the main thing I'm doing here is flicking back and forth, making sure the pattern's right, flicking back and forth, making sure that the sound is as close as I can, and then flicking back and forth and getting the volume right. Then in terms of any processing on the open hat here, there's pretty much nothing. We're just removing some of the lows here. That's about it. So then the next element, so that's what that sounds like all together. Then the idea is to flick back to the reference, hear what you think is coming out the most. And for me, that was kind of like the snare and hat combo. So the next thing I added in was the snare. So let's have a look and listen to this. So for this, this was the kind of where it started. Just one of these. It's on the 2 and the 4, then the 2 and the 4. And then I found, okay, I'll get to the, let me get through the pattern first. Then what I did here also is this little kind of like pickup note. So like, do katika, katika. So I added that in as well. In terms of the sound, how I found this was in the AI separated drum track, I snatched one of the snares. Let me just show you what this looks like. I do have a video on this too, actually. What is that? It's this one here. The better system to steal kick samples from pro artists. The idea essentially is you can like extract a bit from the reference track and then right click it and say show similar files. And then this is like the sound. Okay, so this was the hi-hat, but it'll find you similar sounding samples within your library. And so that is how I ended up getting these 2 snare sounds. And then I just layered them on top of each other. So I use that little similar sound functionality to find the sound. And then the last thing was the volumes, flicking back and forth between the volumes. In terms of any processing, just removing some of the lows. So again, this is that like channel strip. I have this just set up all the time on each track so I can mix as I go really quickly, work through things nice and fast. Usually what I like to do is layer snares and claps together. Snare kind of more down the middle, and then the claps to the left and right, adding some like a little bit more high end and some like stereo width to it. So let's have a listen, look and listen to that. And let's solo the claps. And together. So for the claps here, you can see again, it's kind of that idea, 2 and the 4, 2 and 4. Similar to the open hi-hats, I have like a bunch of clap sounds that I like already like set up here. And so I just found 2, and then I think I have them played, what is it, 12 and 8. 12, 8. They're both down the center. Sometimes I might push one to the left, push one to the right. In this instance, what I did instead was use this width bit here. So what this is a free plugin called Polyverse Wider, and it's really nice for just pushing things to the left and right, making them more stereo, and making it so there's space in the middle for whatever you want down the middle, in this instance the snare. And I've set it up so that the main knob on that is just added to this one little knob here, so I don't have to go about opening it every time, adding it in here, opening up the plugin, finding out where on the weird interface it is. It's just boom, add some width, move on. And then we're just removing a bit of the lows here. And yeah, nothing too crazy in terms of the processing on the channel. You can see the main thing was flicking back and forth and finding the right balance of volume. That's really the main thing. So the next thing that I wanted to add in was the closed hi-hats. So let's take a look and listen to that. And let's solo it. So it's just kind of like a, what would this be? 8th notes or 16th notes? So it's like a shuffly kind of sounding hi-hat thing. Let me explain this. It looks more confusing than it might be. So the thing is, I always start off with this right here. So try to just focus on just what I'm showing here. I'll always start the hi-hat on this like offbeat, just like the open hi-hat, to reinforce the open hi-hat. And this makes that open hat cut through a little bit more as well, like adds like almost like a bit of a punch to it. But then also it's super useful as an arrangement trick, because then if you ever want to pull out the open hat, remove it from a section of the song, you still have the closed hat playing in its place. So that's super useful. Then basically what I did was then added in like the ticka around that sound. And so it looks maybe a little more confusing than it is, but this is usually how I'd start this. I think I might have explained this in another video, but the idea is like it might start like this. And then the idea is to like do like just use one hat sample to get the pattern. And then I'll start playing with the velocities and moving them onto different hi-hats. So different hi-hat samples are playing in an effort to kind of humanize the sound a bit more. It's playing at different velocities. You can see I'm dragging the down like the little randomization velocity range thing. So it's always hitting a little bit differently. If you don't know how to do that, how to do that, I think you could click it and then you go down here and then you press Command and you can see you're changing the velocity range of like where it might hit whenever that note comes around. So yeah, just an effort to kind of humanize things. And what I'll usually work is in chunks. So maybe like something like this is where I'll start and then copy and paste that over and then make like just an adjustment. So it's like slightly different each time. You can see the difference between here and here. These first two sections is this one's playing on 13 here. And then this exact same pattern's happening, but instead this one's playing. So you can see just slight little different things. And then it's over here, slightly different again, just slowly changing it throughout time. That adds that kind of humanization and makes it sound a little bit more interesting and evolving in a really, really subtle way, which is important with like kind of repetitive house music, stuff like this. But yeah, then once the pattern's good, like the sound selection for this, again, what I did was I have like pre-selected hats. So I just kind of like use my ear, flick back and forth between the reference and what I have here and tried out the different samples, try to find what worked the closest. And then that way, yeah, that worked pretty quickly for me. And then what we're doing is a little bit of processing. We're using this transient shaper here to bring down the attack so the initial hit isn't hitting as hard. So it kind of like blends it, pushes it back a bit more in the mix almost, makes it less punchy almost. And then what we're doing is just removing a bit of the lows, making room for like the bass and the kick and all that. And then but the main thing really was just setting up the volume. So then what I usually like to do with the drums is once like the core sounds are set in with MIDI and like individual one-hit samples. So we have like the kick, we have the open hat, the snares, the claps, the hi-hats. Then what I like to do is layer in like audio loops. So top loops or like percussion loops over like more like underneath these core hits to fill out the sound a bit, make it a little bit more complex and interesting and like have a bit more of a interesting vibe. So let me walk you through how I added each one. So first I added this top loop here. Let's solo it. So it's mostly kind of just reinforcing that hi-hat sound, making it a little bit more shuffly. And there's also a couple cool little bongo hits kind of in there. In terms of and for this, I would just look up top loops in like Splice or house breaks and stuff like that. One thing that I did do is I clicked into it and I set if you have the warp algorithm to beats and on transients and then switch it so that the little arrow's pointing to the right, you can drag this down and it'll tighten up the sustain of each one of these hits. And that's a nice way to have it blend in a bit more so it's not as loose and floppy. It's tighter, and so it's gonna like nestle in between your core hits a little bit better. And then something that I actually did do that I also forgot to mention is I've extracted the groove from the drum bit. So like, let me explain this nicely. So we isolated out this little drum part here, and then what I did is right-clicked it and said extract grooves, and this is a nice way that you can take the groove out of the drum rack from the reference that you have, and then you can apply it to everything that you got here. So this will slightly move the hits off the grid a little bit and change the velocities a little bit based on those changes that are happening that you extracted from the actual drum track. So it's a nice way to kind of force all these different elements into the same kind of groove and vibe by applying that to like most of these clips here. Not all of them. Sometimes I'm using like the MPC shuffle groove kind of thing. Kind of want to use your ear, and it's not always like going to be the what you want to do all the time. But in this instance, I'm using the extracted groove on this top loop here. And then in terms of any processing, we're moving some of the lows, make room for the kick and the bass. Just a little side chain so it's pumping, doing that cool dancey thing, and like making room for the kick, and a little bit of that one knob width to push it to the left and right, and then just a little bit of volume. This, sometimes with these top loops, you're kind of flicking back and forth with the reference, but you might be just kind of more dialing it into taste against your core sounds. Next up, I added this. Now let's solo it. So this again is like kind of like this is a shaker, and it's like kind of shuffly, like shuffling, doing the shuffly cool hi-hat kind of thing, reinforcing the hi-hats. What I did here was nothing crazy on here, just applied that groove. Removing a ton more of the low end, a little bit of that side chain, a little bit of width. Nothing too crazy. You can see it styled in, like if the clap is at -2, these little top loops are at like -11 and -10. So you see it's much more subtly mixed in. Next up is this next loop here. Let's solo that. So this is a bit more like snare-y, with some like hi-hats in it, but it's mostly kind of like reinforcing and adding some like interesting character to the core snare. What we're doing is the same little drum groove idea trick, and then tightening these up quite a bit so that they're blending in a lot more with the core hits, and then removing some lows, a little bit of side chain, and then one more that we'll go over here is this last one, which I think is bongo sounds. And let's solo it. So this just like with all these, just looked it up on Splice bongos, and then was playing through it against this as I was also listening to the track here to find something that I thought sounded good. What are we doing here? Just applied some of that groove, and then removing some lows, a little side chain, a little bit of width, and then that is a listen to the drums. So let's have a listen to the drums. And then this is like the stem separated drums. And then what we got. So different, I would say, but also similar. So that's kind of the idea, to try to make it like inspired by the reference tune, but not exactly a carbon copy. This way it's something more, a little more unique that you could actually use. Then moving on from that, what we have now would be all of this. And then the last thing is filling out all these additional little melodic bits. So let's kind of go over that. What we have is this. Let's solo that. And then I think over here. So that's kind of like that main synth line that's happening in the remix track. For this, I wanted to make the decision of like just mostly focusing on the vocal as the hook, because it does have a really like iconic, catchy synth line as well, but it's kind of cheesy, and I decided to like pull back on that. But I did want to replicate it and have something somewhat in there, at least a little bit, somewhat playing homage, and it works well against the vocal. But I wanted to be subtle with it. It was like a very specific choice that I had. In terms of the audio, like the selecting the notes, what I did is I just listened back and forth between that like remix bit and just tried to find the right notes. And then the sound, I think I looked up like Eurodance synth, and then just dropped that in here, and then set it up so that it's this sample is playing a D. So in sampler, you can change the root to a D, so that way it's actually going to hit the right notes that you want. And then I'm using this free A1 trigger gate that's adding that kind of like trancey kind of effect to it. And then a little bit of this standard channel strips up, a little bit sidechain, a bunch of width. The next thing that I added was this piano part. Let me add in the vocal. You're gonna fucking love this. Like, okay, I just found this cool piano, like kind of chord progression, and then cut it up a bunch, and then added it so it drops in like this as like the breakdown. Jokes. If you listen to this part, it's like a classic EDM breakdown that I ended up kind of going for. It sounds hilarious, but it's so epic. This I just found on on Splice and then cut it up, and then that's also why it's useful to know the key of what you're working in, so that when you're looking up stuff on Splice, you can set it to the right key. And we're just removing some lows, little sidechain. I think at some point I just bring in a bit of that stuttery kind of transgate sound, and then for kind of like a pad bit. Let's have a listen to this. So, for example, it kind of works in the more of an arrangement like this. You can hear it swelling up. So, for this is what it sounds like by itself. So what I did here is I didn't really feel like, I don't know, there was a lot of interesting character in the actual like DJ Sammy tune. So what I did was I just AI split the DJ Sammy tune when I was extracting the vocals. That's how I guess I should mention, that's how I got those vocals separated. I AI split them, and then I also had like access to the synths that were separated. So for that, I just grabbed a section of that and then kind of use that as a pad by just removing a bunch of the high end and then having it slowly like swell in and out. Other than that, I guess like you can hear it at certain points of the tune. Like here. So I have that really nestled in quite a bit. Definitely the CASSIMM tune was one of those cool, I think it's really cool when the tunes are like almost just like drum, bass, and vocals. So I didn't want it to have it too synthy. I wanted it just nestled in there, providing a bit of vibe and like throwing back more to the remix track, because that's reinforces that remix track really well. In terms of any processing, I have that little stuttery A1 trigger gate coming in, which is also free. If I didn't mention that, definitely check that out. And then having that like throughout as an arrangement trick, it's making it more and less stuttery throughout the track. I'm using this little pitch thing. It's weird. It just does like a DJ like more drop as like a little arrangement trick at certain points. Other than that, some sidechain, so it's pumping a little width, pushing it to the left and right. And then the next thing I grabbed was this other bit. Like, let me show you this. This one's kind of interesting and weird, I think. And then without this effect. So this is another little bit that I stole from like the AI separated synth bit from the DJ Sammy tune. And then it's like just a small little part in between the main synth bit. And then I threw on this like tantra weird effect kind of thing, removed a whole bunch of the lows, have it so it's auto panning to the left and right a bunch. And then all together, it's pretty subtle, but like I'll throw it all in. And solo. So it's pretty subtle. Again, all like the synth stuff here that I'm trying to do is all super subtle so that it's not like trying to keep it so it's mostly just drums, bass, and vocals. And this is kind of adding that kind of cool, like it sounds almost like wow, kind of like rhythmic kind of vibe. Subtle, all kind of slowly all working together there. And then a couple small little things here. I have like a classic house string. So if I play it at the end. So this is just like a pretty standard house trick, just having one house string note playing. It like really ups the energy, and it's pretty badass. Really cool thing to do from the break going into the drop. And then, oh man, this one's going really long. I should probably finish it off. The last thing that I did is, if we go here, one thing I did was, we have that like stuttery vocal, and then I also have the main vocal precede it. Let me show you what that sounds like. Like the baby of all that part there. What I did as I was like kind of more fleshing out the arrangement is I set it up so that it's throwing this delay. So like the last little bit of the vocal is like echoing out. Let me show you what that sounds like. You hear that like bouncing like kind of like left and right with that delay. I thought that sounded really cool and worked against the stuttery bit. So what I did is I resampled just that and then copied that over. So you can see here, this is just that like echo that happened from that little throw, and I think it works really cool with like this. So just a cool way to like really take a bunch of the vocal and get more out of it, basically. So I think that's a pretty good look at that. Other than that, like there is the main vocal here, which is just the main vocal. I added crystallizer as a weird, like, I have this little weird crystal effect coming in and out, kind of in between spots where it like ends, so right here. That weird delay. That's something I just really like to do. Removing some lows, some sidechain, some width. I threw in a little compressor to kind of keep the sound a bit more dynamic. And then the last thing is that I want to go over for this is all these little effects. So the idea is like there's all these little snare rolls happening. There's reverse crashes going into crashes at the start of sections, and that's why it's helpful to know like what the main parts are. Little like downlifter sounds and uplifter sounds, like noise risers and noise droppers. And one thing that I did that was, I think, particularly interesting that I'm probably going to do a full video on at some point is in my library, I have all of the project files that I've like ever made here. Where the heck is it? Yeah, I think it's here. Oh wait, boom. And so what I did for this is I went back to an older one. I can't remember which one it was, but for each one of these, I usually do some kind of like effects group like this, where there's all these reverse crashes and all that kind of stuff. And what you can actually do is if you save all your project files, or if you have all the project files that I make available, you can go into the project file by saving it in the side here, and then you can just drag the full group over. And so that's what I did for this one to speed things up a little bit. So that way I already had like a bunch of these sounds in here already going, like reverse crashes and all that kind of stuff already in here, and I just had to move things around and play with it. So that was a cool little trick there. And yeah, I think that's probably a good look at this one. If you want to grab this project file, you can. The link will be in the description. I'm going to clean this up, get rid of some of this, like I can't give you this or anything like that, but there's a lot of automation in this one, so this would be a pretty interesting one to dive into. And yeah, hopefully you found this useful, and let's do a recap of the 80-20 rule now. Hi, my friend, Matt from Best Friends Club here, and if you've been paying attention to this super long video, then you've probably figured out what the 80-20 rule is when it comes to building out your songs. The goal here is to get 80% of the result with only 20% of the time, energy, and effort. And because the first key to the 80-20 rule here is to use a reference track, we're making sure that we're very easily hitting 80% of a high quality, professionally made song. In particular, we use that reference track to make sure that we're picking the right notes, sounds, and volumes as we're building out our song. The second key of the 80-20 rule here is to mix as you go in an extremely streamlined way by only focusing on the volume of each track, as well as using a simple repeatable channel strip for each track that we're adding to our songs. The third and final key is to repurpose your old project files and have a suite of powerful templates, Ableton racks, and one-knob effects that you've personalized and curated over time. If you'd like to get a head start by downloading all the racks, templates, and all the files that you've seen me use in the Ableton project file for this video, or if you'd just like to take a closer look at any of the techniques or tracks you saw me work on in this video at your own pace, You can find a link to this video's project files on screen now and at the second link that's in the YouTube description. I'm recreating a different song from the Beatport top charts every single week and making the project files available to anyone who wants them. You'll also get access to a private Discord where you can ask me and the community questions, as well as shared tracks for feedback. If you or your music are not quite ready for a shot in the arm like that, I've also made you a completely free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that have helped me figure out how to completely finish one new song each and every single week. And you can grab that free Ultimate Song Finishing Toolkit by visiting the first link that's in the YouTube description here. However, if you just feel like staying on YouTube for now, that's totally fine. Save that link for later and check out this playlist filled with videos just like the one you just watched, where I completely create songs inspired by tracks found in the Beatport top charts. Or if you really want to take what you've learned in this video to the next level, make sure you check out this video right here.